Hi, my name is Cindy Laatsch, and I'm here today to talk about a really important topic as we look at your year as a club officer. And that is, how do we resolve conflict? First of all, your role as a club officer, especially when you're thinking about the potential of there might be conflict, whether that's in the club or within board members, is remember, through this process, be supportive. Listen, and I know that sounds really simple and easy, but it's so important to stay plugged in and really listen as people communicate with you. Another really important thing that I found over time is ask questions. When you ask questions, you're not only clarifying your observations, but you're also asking the person speaking you to clarify what they mean as well. And sometimes that clarity is really what helps us move through conflict. The other thing I always ask people is, have you discussed your feelings with that person? Sometimes people come to someone else, whether that's a fellow board member or a fellow Toastmaster, to talk about a conflict they may be having with someone else. And one of the best rules of thumb I can provide is remember, suggest, have you talked to them about your feelings yet? When I worked at Harley Davidson, if you went to the vice president to seek input on a conflict, he'd say, have you talked to that other person? He would not actually speak to us until we talked to them twice to try to resolve it. And then when we spoke to him, we both had to go together. And that was actually really sound advice. So remember, ask people, have you discussed your feelings with the individual in question? The other is offer to be a listener. Often in a conflict, two parties come together and they have trouble hearing what's actually being said. Offer to be that listener, that person that sits between the individuals to hear both sides and understand. Because remember, a lot of what we have conflict over is just personal opinions and the way we feel about things. The other magic key that I always try to remember is seek to solve conflict on the lower level possible. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when you're having a conflict with someone, it can be frustrating, but don't immediately think, who can I talk to up the chain? Think, who is the most important person on the level that's appropriate for me to solve this? And often in conflict, the most logical place to start is the person you have the perceived conflict with. And as difficult as that is, it's far more productive to go there and say, this makes me feel really uncomfortable, but I really would like to chat with you about what's going on between us at the board meetings. When you solve a conflict at the lowest level possible, it means you don't need to involve others in the process, which is really helpful as you move through the process. So the first question I always like to ask people is, what is conflict? If you Google the word, conflict is described as a serious disagreement and or an argument about something deemed important. And I think that's the cue for me. If two people or groups are in conflict, they have a disagreement and have not yet reached agreement. Some of the key words in that are serious disagreement or argument. And the second part is that are deemed important. There are many times, whether it's at work, in family life, or in Toastmasters, there are things that I'm really not invested in. And I say, that's a great idea. And yet, if I deem something important, I may have feedback for a person. I may have input for a person. And often people, especially people that we might not know well, might perceive that as a disagreement when it can actually just be feedback. The other part of that, which I think is important, is they have not yet reached agreement. And I want to challenge all of you, as you move through your club officer year, continue to seek agreement, especially on what are you doing as a club officer? Who are you serving? You're serving the board, of course. You're serving your members. And members do not need to be pulled in to conflict if that exists, or there is the perception that it exists on the board. So think about, what is conflict? Is this what I'm experiencing right now really a conflict? And if you are in conflict, instead of thinking, this is what we disagree on, consider thinking, what can we agree on? And the first thing you can always agree on is how you're going to move forward for your members. How do we feel about conflict, and what do we feel about conflict? We hear this all the time. I don't like conflict. I will avoid conflict at all costs. I'd rather just get along with people. And I am super uncomfortable if I experience conflict in my life. I'd like to challenge that. I don't love conflict either. I don't seek conflict. But conflict is really people having differing opinions about something. Much like an evaluation at our Toastmaster Club, it is an evaluation, not a fact. So thinking about conflict that way, oh, I don't like this, it makes me uncomfortable. Can't we just all get along? Those are things that sometimes they can't work. Yes, the world would be great if everyone got along all the time, but we've learned over time that that doesn't happen. But it doesn't have to make you feel uncomfortable. Another way to look at things is, I'm okay with conflict, which to me, in my head, because I don't love conflict, I've learned to sit in people disagreeing with me and listen and think, I never thought of that. Or think, thank you for that information. I feel very confident in my decision. I think you get really good ideas from conflict. And conflict could just mean we have two various ways to look at something. So if you've always thought that the agenda should look like this, and someone comes in and says, you know what? I'm in another club and we do things this way, that can be conflict for some people. And I like to think of it as, that's really interesting. I never thought of it that way before. And really, isn't conflict just different opinions? When you do evaluations of speeches in Toastmasters and you're listening to someone evaluate, very often I will think, well, I didn't observe that. And that's what I want you to start to think about when you think about the word conflict. It doesn't have to be a negative. It can be a productive exercise as long as you learn to be comfortable sitting and listening to others' opinions. There's a different way to look at conflict. Sometimes as a board member, you need to mediate conflict. You need to sit with those two parties. One thing I've learned over time is you don't own the conflict. When individuals are having conflict around you, or even when you're in conflict or perceived conflict with another, you don't own the conflict. Get to know the people during these processes. Sometimes when there's uncomfortable feelings, we tend to go into what I call the camp mentality. Well, I've got 5 board members in my camp, and there's this other individual, and my camp is bigger. Well, that's not true, and it doesn't work that way. Really getting to know, respect, and understand people during the process helps us be kinder, especially if conflict would arise. The other thing, don't take sides. If someone thinks, I love the agenda this way, we've always done it that way, and someone says, I saw this club, they have a quiz master and a joke master. Both of those are valid. And it's not fair to take sides with people. I think the best thing we can learn with conflict in our lives is, I'm going to just sit in here and listen. I'm going to write some things down as we talk, but I'm not going to take sides. And listen deeply to what is being communicated or not. I'll give you an example. I was involved with someone who was in conflict with another, and they said, what's not fair is she always comes to meetings late. Well, first of all, I said, always? Well, no, not always. But a lot of the time, okay, and this person was really focused on if the call starts at 8 and someone dials in at 8:05, I feel completely disrespected. I get that because I have a thing about time myself, but I really want others to think about this. Could they have been running in from work? Could they have a childcare issue? Could they have really forgotten that there was a call? Because I'll tell you, there are times, as much as I want to be on time, I've been late because I was in another room or because I truly was mixed up on the dates. So remember, we tend to judge others on their actions, dialing in late, but we tend to judge ourselves by our intentions. Well, I meant to dial in on time. So remember, listen to what people are communicating. I don't think this individual was ultimately deeply concerned about the person dialing in late to meetings. What I think was going on is this individual was saying, I want you to respect the work we're doing enough that you want to be here with me. And I said, you know what's interesting? Tell them that instead of you need to be on time. So really listen deeply for what's being said and what's not being said if there's conflict. And this is so important. Ask questions and remain curious. Being curious to me takes action like this. Bob, that's really interesting. I hadn't seen it that way. Tell me more about why you feel that way. Tell me how you see that happening. I really want to understand more. So, asking questions and being curious about how that person feels is a really great way to take the sensitivity off of conflict. So, let's talk about my big five guides if you're in a conflict or if you have to mediate a conflict, especially as a board member. So, the big five, here they are. Remember, there are no secrets. There are no secrets. Remain the mirror. This is a good one. Learn to flip it. And the last two have deep meaning for me. In a conflict, as well as just in life, all you ever get to see is yourself. And the last one is every moment you can choose to live in fear or trust. And every moment you get to choose again. So now what I'd like to do is break these all apart and go through them one by one. Number one, remember there are no secrets. And what do I mean by this? If I have a conflict with someone, if we have a difference of opinion, another person on the board and I, that's important. However, if I go to a friend of mine and say, you know, I had this horrible call with Bob yesterday, and he has this opinion about meetings that I'm sorry, it just doesn't work for me. The minute you start to share with others your observation, and that's truly just all it is, your observation of the reality, it suddenly exposes that to other people, their filters, and then it becomes like that game. Remember the game telephone, where I tell you one thing and then you whisper it and then it goes on. So the only way to preserve dignity and control, especially during a conflict, is keep it between the parties. I totally understand how sometimes we want to share something with someone to take the pressure off of us. But especially in a conflict, it does not help as you're seeking that solution. So as long as it's between you and another individual, we're safe. But the minute someone starts to talk about it with others, it can become a challenge. So remember, you might think there are secrets, but there are no secrets. All right, let's move on to guide number 2. Remain the mirror. And what do I mean here? Remain the mirror. That's a tough one. How do you remain a mirror? Well, let's think. What is a mirror? A mirror is something that waits and doesn't judge until you walk in front of it. And then it gives you back your vision. It doesn't change it. It doesn't morph it. It doesn't politicize it. A mirror just gives you back the reflection of who you already are. So think about a conflict. If you're in a conflict with someone, whether it's between you or in the workplace or anywhere, or throughout your Toastmasters experience, sometimes bringing another person in who can be the mirror is interesting because they're going to see things differently and they're going to ask those questions. Like I did when someone said, that person comes late to meetings and I think they're disrespecting me. So, as my mirror, I said, what leads you to believe that? And the conversation went on. They said, well, I think that when someone's late to meetings, it means I don't respect you enough to be on time. Oh, well, if you think that way, that's a valid opinion. Could it be something else? And so when you serve as a mirror, I wasn't putting my personal slant in at all. It's tempting because I had the same perception about time originally. But when you remain a mirror, it really helps you, whether you're involved in a conflict or participating to help mediate a conflict. And one thing I will tell you is I have used this mirroring technique. I've been on many boards in Toastmasters as well as other groups like the United Way. Oftentimes, by remaining curious and being that mirror and saying, help me see what you're saying. I don't understand it right now. Instead of saying, well, that's wrong. I don't agree with that. By remaining that mirror, you remain the neutral party that allows people to speak comfortably, freely, and with a great amount of trust. And remaining a trusted source throughout conflict, it's incredibly important. What's the next one? This is a fun one. I learned this the hard way. That is not me, by the way, but learn to flip it. And I'll tell you about a conflict I had in my work life years ago. I worked in a department that was great. Everything was great. And another person from another department of the same company came into the department in a position. And they just took charge. It was my way, the highway. We had been working together as a unit, and this individual came in and really said, no, I want this to change. I don't like this. And I immediately started to feel uncomfortable, partly because my style is such that I'm like, well, you're brand new here. Perhaps you should observe us and watch and then become part of the solution. But their style was such that they just came in and that was it. So I had all these repetitive negative thoughts. This person always does this. They always do that. They never let me speak. And I went on and on and on. Well, one day I decided, Cindy, I'm going to flip it. And I took out a pen and paper. And what I did was I wrote their name on the top of the page. And I started to write all the things I valued about that person, or we have had in common, or that I respected. Now, initially, I was a little slow, but then I went, oh, wait, I really respect the fact that as a mother, she's taking real care of her child because her child was about to go into the military. Yeah, I respect that. Oh, you know what? I also really think it's great that that individual volunteers at this organization and just gives so many hours of volunteer work. Oh, I like to volunteer for Toastmasters. Oh, we have that in common. And then I said, well, she's extremely passionate about how she works. And I think I'm kind of passionate about how I work. We just do it differently. So suddenly, instead of looking at all the things that we had that were different, I realized we had pages of things. So when we came together and I started to feel those feelings, those negative feelings, I thought back on that list and I thought, wait, we have commonalities. And that's easy to do in Toastmasters. What do we have in common? We belong to clubs, we're members, we're volunteers, we all have varying degrees of passion, we're committed, we all follow basically the same routine, speaking, evaluating. We have so much in common. We all took the Toastmasters promise. These are things that we all have in common. So when we start to feel separated by a conflict, I'm going to challenge you to flip it. Get out paper and pencil and write down, these are all the things I have in common with that individual. And if your list starts with something as basic as, well, we're both Toastmasters, we're both club officers, that is a positive. So remember, don't get entrenched in how you think, because negative thinking is very easy for us to do. Let's think about how we can do this in a positive way and flip how we think about that individual. And here's one of my favorites. All you ever get to see is yourself, especially in conflict. And I'll give you an example, again, from my workplace. This individual that really challenged me, I thought, well, when I got a new job, I would start there. I'd get the lay of the land. I'd figure things out. I'd observe. I'd look at how things go. Then I'd start to do what I call adding value. I might have input. I might act differently. They came in and just said, here's what I want. Here's how we should do things. And I really internally railed against that. And I went, wait a minute, Cindy, that doesn't mean they're wrong. What it means is you have a strong feeling of how you think things should be done. So I wasn't revealing that individual I felt I had conflict with. I was revealing myself and my desires and my thoughts and my processes. Once I did that, I could say, well, I don't agree with their style, but my style probably makes them crazy. So suddenly I realized, wait a minute. And I've had this even in a Toastmasters as a club officer. I might think tradition. I might think this is how we've always done things. And that's a phrase I caution you to use. We've always done it this way. We've always had speaker, table topics, evaluator. Somebody comes in and says, you know what? Let's try something different. Let's do table topics first, and let's do all these other changes to the agenda. Let's see what happens. Some people instinctively go, no, we've always done it this way. Who are you revealing? You're not revealing the person that is proposing the changes. You're revealing yourself. And the beauty of that is, since all you ever really get to see is yourself, and if that person is observant, all they ever get to see is themselves, you can suddenly say, whoa, Cindy, that individual in the workplace isn't wrong. They just perceive how they work as different. And it's okay for you to tell them that that makes you feel challenged, uncomfortable, but they don't have to change their style. So remember, when you're having a conflict, whether it's you with an individual or someone else is having a conflict, as you observe it, really start to think about, what is this conflict revealing about their needs, and what can I do to help solve those needs? All you ever get to see is yourself. That was a game changer for me. And once I learned that one and the next one, it really helped me get a handle on why conflict is okay, and why I really firmly believe that when I have conflict in my life, I'm going to survive. And this one took me a while to understand. Every moment you can choose to live in fear or trust. And every moment you get to choose again. So trust, right? We love trust. And notice the fear image is kind of a dark cloud. Well, let me break this apart for you. I went online and I looked up the word moment. Now, we all know what a minute is. A minute is 60 seconds. We know what a minute is. Well, a moment has a little more flexibility to it. Back in the day, a moment was considered about 90 seconds, more or less. I like to think of it as, imagine you have a coffee pot and you're holding a saucer with the coffee pot, and you carefully pour coffee so you don't spill it. Carefully pour, carefully pour, carefully pour. Then you come back and you put the saucer down. That's about a moment. You hear people say that, hey, give me a moment. They don't mean give me 60 seconds. They mean in about that amount of time, give me a moment. If you've ever practiced yoga, it's very centered on your breathing because breathing allows you to take a moment. And if we've ever been angry in any situation, if we can take a moment, we can really put it in its place. So that's what a moment means in this sentence. And then let me talk about fear and trust. This was an eye opener for me. Living in fear to me has meant living in fear that I might be wrong, living in fear that things will change, living in fear that because we've done it this way, now it's okay to try it this way. That doubting, that gnawing, that feeling of, am I good enough? Do I know enough? Is this right? That can be fear. And trust to me means I have trust in this relationship. I trust we are looking for the same outcome. So every moment, every 90 seconds or so, if you're experiencing fear, take a breath, take a moment, and you get to decide, am I going to keep going in this way, in conflict, in fear, in anger? Or can I make a decision to get back to trust? Trusting myself, trusting that individual, trusting that nothing is going to break if we try it this way. So this was a very powerful learning, especially when you're in conflict, because it can become, I think this, I think this, and people can get very entrenched. But if each of you said, well, I can still think like this and be angry, or I can reflect and in my own head say, no, I know we're on the same path. So every moment you can choose to live in fear or trust. And every moment you get to pick again, which is extremely positive and uplifting. So even if I'm stressing out over something, which happens, I get to reflect and say, am I going to stick with this? Or am I going to choose something different? It's really important to realize I get to make the choice. So why do we pick that fear? Sometimes we pick it because it's a habit. Sometimes we pick it because, oh, we might not feel confident. Here's another one. Sometimes we pick it because we hope it'll go away. Sometimes we pick it and think back to that slide at the beginning about why are you uncomfortable with conflict? Oh, it makes me feel uncomfortable. Why do we pick fear? I want each of you to think, if I've ever done that, why is it? And I have an option now. I get to continue on this line of thinking if that's what works for you, or realize I can pause and I can reflect, take that breath, and go back in with a refreshed perspective. So, being a club officer is an incredible opportunity. You've stepped up, you're leaning in, and you are leading by example. Because whether you know it or not, people are observing you. Whether you see it or not, people know what happens at a club officer meeting. So, really be confident and understand that there are eyes and they're watching you. And this is your opportunity to lead by your example. Another bit of advice I have as an officer, sometimes when we're elected, we go and we have that board meeting privately. Invite the club members to come if they want. The other thing that I find to be a really interesting practice as a club officer is every time you meet, bring up one of the officers. So let's say you start with the treasurer and say, hey, Susan, as club treasurer, step forward and tell us, what do you do on the board? And they can take 60 seconds, they can take a minute, 2 minutes, and talk about it. Then the next time, talk about the secretary. Then the next time, talk about membership. Why is this important? Because if your board goes off and meets and no one really knows what you do, and things are happening, but no one really knows how it's happening, when next year rolls around, and it will roll around quickly, and you're looking for club officers, but they've never seen you, they don't know what the board does. It can be sometimes challenging to get people to step into board meetings. But if at every meeting, one of the officers steps up and talks about, this is what I've learned, this is how I apply it to my workplace, this is the training I've had, suddenly when next year rolls around, you have a great opportunity because all of the club members have had exposure to what the club officers do. So really consider a mechanism for sharing your role throughout the Toastmaster year. And I think one thing that's vitally important, always important, is support each other. Support each other, even if you don't agree. It isn't about winning, it isn't about being the right one. And I really had to learn that the board is there to make the club effective. And remember, you're here to support the members. That's why it's important that as you do your role as an officer, and you know that people are looking and observing, when you do your role, they might say, I really enjoyed watching that VP of membership help grow the club. I'm interested. Not this year, but maybe the next year. And you can then grow that. So really consider those really important things. You have an opportunity. You are a leader by being in that role. Share what you do throughout the year and support each other and your members, because that's why you're here as a club officer. What's most important? Remember, leadership is an action, not a position. So as the year starts in Toastmasters, and I'm not joking, things are going to happen really quickly, and you're going to get settled in, and then you're going to look around and it's suddenly January, and then it's suddenly March. So it's all about taking action. Execution is what's so important. Be a positive role model on your club as an officer. And remember, this is not just a position. It's about taking action. Congratulations. I am so proud that you've decided to take that step to be a club officer, because remember, you are leading by example, and your example can be a shining one. Thank you.